Hello, this is Everyday Anarchism, and my guest today is John Raymond, and we are here talking about his new book, Denial. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to start before we start discussing with a blurb, your author spiel of what Denial is? The
Sure.
book, not just the
Yes,
not just the
yes,
concept.
exactly. Yeah, I live it every day. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasingly simple premise. It's the year is 2052, 30 years in the future. The world has undergone a global Green New Deal that has altered but not entirely transformed society as we know it. It has allowed humanity to avoid some of the worst consequences of climate change, at least for the time being. But it has left a lot of the day-to-day life of shopping and eating and meeting your friends intact. Um, part of the Green New Deal, which were called the uprisings. It was a time of like very enormous change within a small period of time, and part of that process were some Nuremberg-style trials of prominent carbon criminals. So, executives at oil companies and people like that were put on trial and held responsible for the crimes um, of their corporations. Some of those people escaped, however, and so this story is about a journalist named Jack, who discovers one of those climate criminals in hiding in Mexico and proceeds to find him and attempt to unmask him. It's kind of a Nazi hunter story in like ecological drag in a certain way, and yeah, is a thriller of sorts.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. I mean, I will say, I mean, and this gets back, I was talking to you before we started recording about how I learned about this from a piece that you wrote for Lit Hub about like science fiction for people who don't like science fiction. I have some objections to that, which we may or may not get to, but
Please
I'll
do.
stick with this idea
Do
of
it.
genre, which is like, I mean, this is a tricky book. It's a beautifully written book. I really admired it a lot. I really enjoyed writing it. The prose is excellent, which since I knew you primarily through your film work, I mean, that's something I'm always scared of. When I pick up a book from someone who I haven't, read their prose, I'm like, ooh, am I,
Mhm.
I'm not going to name any of the screenwriters who write great scripts but write terrible prose, but you are not one of them.
Thank you.
Um,
I aim not to be. Yeah.
yes, yeah. Well, it's very clear that you're a novelist and a good one. But it's also this. I mean, this book in some ways, there's someone, I think it might be Michael Chabon, who is always ranting about the lack of respect given to every genre besides middle brow fiction stories. And this is a book that fits quite well with the works of Alice Munro or John Cheever or whoever you want in that literary fiction mode that is also a Nuremberg story and a Nazi hunting story and an eco-catastrophe story. And I don't think people pull that off that well that often. So I wanted to see how, I mean, did you have that in your mind, that challenge when you were writing it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, boy, there's a few things in there. Um, yes, I'm familiar with the Chabon argument about the sort of ghettoization of genre fiction. And it's funny. I mean, I feel like that defense of genre fiction to me has been like prevalent enough over the last few decades between him and Jonathan Lethem and like a
Mhm.
lot of the McSweeney's people, and like it's a definite discourse that's out there, um, to the point where I at this point have become really defensive about like naturalist fiction and realist fiction, which to me at this point has become the sort of ghettoized thing where it's like someone has to stand up for like character based sort of you know, epiphany centric, like miniaturist sort of fiction. And so, um, you know, because to me that is like actually what I enjoy the most, which I respond to the most. Like, I mean, you know, I wish that this was could touch the hem of Alice Munro. I mean, that is to me the gold standard of what fiction should be. You know,
Yeah, I would just
um,
break in and say yes. I mean,
of course,
has
yeah,
anyone ever written
yeah.
better fiction in that style than Alice Munro? I can't say off the top of my head
Yeah, I
anyone.
mean, I would put Mavis Gallant like very
Mm,
close, but they are, you know, that's like of a echelon that is like you're just like I don't even understand how this happens. This is too much. But like for me, so that said, okay, like yeah, Mavis Gallant and Alice Munro live in a certain world. I am, you know, not able to understand how to fabricate that kind of thing, and so just on a purely practical level, genre is really important to me because genre does sort of give you a certain pattern to work with, and it allows you, you know, certain spaces to fill and just a vibe to understand. And so, really, in a lot of the things that I've done, there is some version of a genre that is being written usually sort of against in some kind of way, but it's there to help understand like how to structure something. And so, you know, for this one, it is like a climate catastrophe thing in a certain sense. Um, but I think really what it is kind of a noir novel. You know, I mean, I think it's probably fits the most less like in a Alice Munro world than in like a James Cain or Graham Greene kind of world.
oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I thought of John le Carre actually when I was reading it, but it's
Uh,
it's still
yeah.
in that zone. What you're best known for, what I knew you best for, was the screenplays you've written with the filmmaker Kelly Reichardt, and very much some of the most famous ones, Meek's Cutoff and especially First Cow, are thought of, or I would think of them as Western slash pioneer story, and then what people have been calling since at least the '60s revisionist westerns. And so, if this, in this sense, this could be seen as a revisionist post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the revisionist western of those films, like it does feel like to me related to the sort of revisionist post-apocalyptic genre that I guess I was thinking about here. And um, I mean, yeah, going back to, you know, sort of what I was saying about genre providing some sort of you know, guiding structure or pattern to a particular thing. I I mean, I'm sure there are many literary critics who have like talked about the kind of bond between genre and ideology, you know, that
Mhm.
they are kind of structures of feeling in a certain sense. I feel like the same definition can apply to both of those words. Um, and I think, yeah, it's really obvious that the traditional classic Western has an ideology that is, you know, imperialist and patriarchal, and you know, to me personally, objectionable on a lot of levels. You know, and so those films, yeah, Meek's Cutoff, you know, is very much a kind of 45-degree like intersection with a traditional Western in a sense. And I would say First Cow is like almost a 180-degree like kind of reversal of a lot of those tropes. And those you know, and you know, but those sort of traditional Western genre signposts did offer a lot of, you know, help in figuring out how those stories could unfold. And so, you know, in a similar way, yeah, I have, it turns out, like an ideological beef with dystopian and post-apocalyptic post-apocalyptic literature as it has evolved to our current dystopian and post-apocalyptic society. And you know, that was a lot of the motivation for doing this book in the first place.
Okay, so at this point, I think I need to I need to just say to the listener, you have not accidentally wandered into a literature podcast. I mean, I but I have been a literature professor all along. I've just been hiding it. And the reason why this book struck me as so interesting is, well, for one thing, as I've talked to people over the course of this podcast, especially the people who are a little more adjacent and accepting of whatever you want to say, the mainstream political system, as opposed to the more, some of the more extreme anarchists that I've talked to, there's just
Mhm.
been this sense that the system has to be maintained, the system, whatever you want to call it, capitalism, government, everything, because it's what feeds and clothes us. And then there's also the sense that that this same system is the one that is destroying the world. And when you look at the history of the environmental movement, it intersects with the history of anarchism over and over and
Yeah.
over again. And then your book, and this is where we can maybe move away from literature and also to a certain extent away from the narrative of the novel, because I'm interested, and this is the classic science fiction move, in what
Yeah.
is called, somewhat unpretentiously, quote, world building, the
Yeah.
apocalypse
Yeah.
that happened or didn't happen, and of course the uprising that has solidarity. What a great,
Yeah.
anarchist term at the heart of it.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'll just yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the question there
There's,
is,
I
but
mean,
I
I didn't
but
I
I
didn't get
have
to a question, but just say
yeah.
whatever you want in
Yeah,
response.
well, what I'll say in response is that the book Denial, as the title will indicate, is premised on many different forms of denial. Like numerous of the characters live in differing states of denial, and there's barely a scene in the book that is not structured around some kind of unspoken like dissembling of some kind. Um, but uh, but I would say the most profound sort of denial structuring this book is my own denial, as far as like understanding how the world will in 30 years resemble like sort of normalized place.
Mm.
And like, the world building is vague in this book for that exact reason, because there's a massive question mark I have in how we get from this place to that place, um, without, you know much more radical changes than are evident in this book. So, um, you know, I hope that there's like a meta denial in here. And I'll just say my like rationale for, sorry, I'm just like, I obviously got a lot of shit to say about this, but
That's
you
why
know,
this is a
yeah,
podcast. You're
yeah,
supposed to
exactly.
say
Right.
shit about
Exactly.
this,
Yeah,
John.
exactly. All right, here I go. Um, I feel like I have witnessed like you could call it denial, or you could also call it a kind of magical thinking in a sense. And I have seen, or we have all seen, the really disgusting ways in which magical thinking has warped our society, and the kind of like refusal of facts and the refusal of like common decency in a certain sense, and how really effective a certain form of, yeah, just delusional sort of enunciation is. And so for me, I was like, why can't we do that from the other side? I'm just going to close my eyes and pretend like we can get to this particular place, and like hopefully reality will organize itself in our wake.
Yeah, well, it does. You don't go into it in depth, but it is clear. What do they call it? The upheaval. It's clear that
The
there's a
upheavals, yeah.
yeah, there's a grassroots
Yeah.
response, which, ever since environmental awareness became relatively mainstream, you could say in the 60s, people
Yeah.
have been waiting
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the upheaval. And
Hmm.
we seem to still be be waiting.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm not optimistic that the upheaval is coming, but I'm
No.
very frustrated with the people who suggest it's not needed. Who are like, well, if we can
Yeah.
just get
Right.
carbon capture technology going, everything will be fun. It's like, yes, I'm pessimistic about the uprising, but god damn it, what's the other alternative?
Totally. No, I mean, it's like, I mean, to me, that was the point of this. Is like, I just need to find a way to think about this stuff in some way, because there's just too much cognitive dissonance to like be living in an emergency all the time, pretending like nothing's going on, but also to, yeah, I mean, it's just how do you even conceive of a future horizon? I mean, it's become really, really difficult. So I feel like, yeah, for me, this book was sort of a step in that direction. Like, I don't really like know what it augurs like action wise. Yeah.
Well, you can come back on in 30 years and
Yeah,
we can talk
exactly. We
about
can
what you
update.
got right.
Exactly. Right.
But I mean, it's very. I mean, another thing that fascinated me from my political angle reading this book is very early on. The protagonist encounters, the young punks who think they're a legacy of the upheaval, but don't actually remember the upheaval. And the protagonist thinks, every revolution becomes bureaucracy, and they haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, right. And that's a successful
Yeah,
revolution,
yeah.
I mean, it's like most of them don't even go that far. Yeah.
But the best case scenario is you've got this. It's called
Yeah.
the upheaval, and it's the solidarity with air, solidarity with trees, and then the next thing you know, you've got a huge court case, which is very unanarchistic and says,
Yeah.
let's assign blame to certain people, and then we're good because we
Yeah.
assign some blame, and then we can just move forward. And
Yeah.
I must admit, this is disappointing to me in terms of the world
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the alternative, this is denial again, is to assign blame where it belongs, which is to
Which
all
is
of us.
ourselves. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. Which is good. I mean, that's the rat, or that's the complaint about Alice Munro and realist fiction, is that it, by just merely describing the world as it is, like, you are not envisioning a sort of better and more just sort of society, and that is politically unsavory in some kind of way. Um, but being like at heart a very practical person, I'm like, I just don't really see the point of imagining a world in which you pretend that like human nature isn't what it is, and you pretend like um, you know mass movements don't have the lifespans that they do, and like it's um, time to, let's see, how does the song go? All along the watchtower, the hour's getting, like, yeah, let us not talk falsely now, the hour is getting late. Like, we need to like get down to some brass tacks.
Yeah, when I had Kim Stanley Robinson on the show, he was like, this pains me to say as an old hippie leftist, but we need some sort of Keynesian government intervention, like this,
Yeah,
whatever it was that we were
totally.
dreaming
Yeah,
of. See that?
totally. No, I mean, and happily, I had not read The Ministry for the Future before I wrote this book, because that would have made it even more evident just sort of how shallowly fantastical my own sort of premises, that these upheavals could be achieved in this kind of time period and with this little seeming kind of ramification. But but yeah, I mean, he's such a really incredible thinker, I think, and so inspiring on a lot of levels. And it's true. I mean, at this point, I feel like you know neoliberalism is going to be the best fucking thing anyone ever saw, compared to compared to either to fascism or towards whatever like Hobbesian fucking cannibal state total cultural decline will be.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean,
yeah.
I suppose the alternative is like live on a co-op farm or blow up dams or something like that. And that's, I mean, you can see that I'm that that that's
Yeah,
that's
right,
not the route that I
right.
am taking. Although certainly
Yeah. Well,
that's
and
part of.
that was one of our movies,
Yeah,
was
I
called
know.
Night Moves, which, yeah, right.
It's
And which I got into trouble with anarchists, because they were like, an anarchist would never commit homicide. Like, there's no possible way that an anarchist would ever stoop to that kind of level. And and it was actually a really fun conversation I had with an anarchist sort of interviewer, um, that became kind of not like heated, because we were both really polite people, but it's like, in my mind, I'm like, you never know what someone's going to do, and like, they're definitely, you can't really say blanketly that like anyone espousing anarchist ideals will not like turn out to be, have bad judgment at certain times. It is just humans. Yeah.
I mean, that's also a really strong denial, let's say, of the history of the anarchist movement, which
Yeah. Yeah.
has its pacifist side, and that's the side I am more interested
Yeah.
in. I mean, you can say, I mean, this is wrote to listeners of the show, but King, Thoreau, Gandhi, this is a form of anarchism, but assassination is also a form of anarchism. And yes,
Yeah,
I agree, there's something incompatible with violence and anarchism, but that's rarely the exclusive
totally.
position of
Exactly.
the anarchist.
Yeah.
That violence is completely incompatible with
Yeah.
anarchism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even Ministry for the Future is so interesting on that level. I mean, to me, I found the Black Ops in that book the most fascinating. I mean, just because literarily they're kind of the most juicy, when you have people assassinating and blowing up infrastructure and stuff. But he keeps it really politely off stage. It's funny, like there's a kind of decency to the book that doesn't seem to really want to explore that part, but that seems to also believe that it's a necessary part of whatever rescue mission is going to happen.
Yeah, the example, I haven't talked about this on this podcast yet, but the example I always use with my students is the film, not so much the comic book, but the film V for Vendetta, which suggests that we need, anarchism to save us, and it ends up a completely fascist film. It ends up with this huge movement that comes at night with fire and a big leader and destroys things, and that's the danger, is when you go down
And
that
that's
kind of. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's like the movie where those Guy Fawkes masks came from, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I have always found so ridiculous. It's just like, seriously, this is the Occupy like mask is just fucking like thing built by some PR department at a Hollywood like studio. Like I've found those Guy Fawkes masks so annoying.
Yeah, it's fascistic. It's a worship
Yeah,
of
totally.
violence, and Hitler didn't say I am evil. Hitler said I am you, and your power flows through me, and I will smash the evil institutions. And that's
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
that's fascism.
Yeah.
And
No,
there
no
are
one.
people.
Yeah, no one. I've yet to encounter anyone who calls themselves a fascist. Really, I mean, although I guess they almost do. I guess the Proud Boys come pretty close to that.
But yeah, it's like, this is, there is a left wing version of this. I mean, the anarchist old enemy, of course, is the left wing bureaucrats, but then there's also the,
Yeah.
like, man, you guys seem really into violence
Oh
and,
yeah.
and
Well,
authority in a certain way.
totally. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Living in Portland,
Yes. Oh wow,
this
I
is
hadn't thought
not a.
about that.
Yeah. This is not a. This is actually a very like immediate and concrete kind of question, and definitely living through 2020 here. Um, there's no question that there is not. I mean, you could call it a fascist wing of Antifa, or you could call it probably more accurately like a Khmer Rouge sort of wing of Antifa. But watching the street fights go on, for 100+ nights here, and people within the Antifa faction doing things like smashing into the Oregon Historical Society and trashing like stuff inside the Historical Society, or just stupidly just smashing a bunch of small businesses like windows all the time. And like there was no, it clearly is like, yeah, whether or not it's like you know ideological or not, it's just a kind of uh um you know it's basically like a testosterone thing. I mean, it's like it's just like you're practically as big of an assholes as those guys coming in their trucks with their banners. But
Yeah.
that said,
No.
that's a sliver of
Mhm.
the greater Antifa thing, because there's also that part of me that's like, yeah, you fight fascism on the street before it actually enters the like state, and like that is I'm really grateful to a lot of the like Antifa people. I made air quotes there that you won't hear on the
Yeah, they
you
don't
won't hear on
translate
the
your
radio.
podcast
Yeah,
that well,
exactly.
do
Yeah.
they?
Whatever. Call it Antifa, call it whatever. But like there is a part of me that's like I'm grateful that a lot of people were standing up and confronting what are not even proto-fascist, but actually just
Mhm.
full-on fascist sort of gatherings in our city. Like that's fucked up.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Catalan architect Gaudi, and I'm also a
Yeah.
big fan of the Spanish Revolution that became the Spanish Civil War. But when you go to Sagrada Familia, they're like, oh yeah, we don't have his plan. It's very sad. We don't have his plan. It was burned. That's all it says. It was burned. I was, reading later, the anarchists burned it because it was, it was a Catholic, Catholic building. So they were striking against the man. And I just, here in 2022, want to be like, guys, couldn't you have, like, I'm okay with you burning a lot of the Catholic documents, but couldn't you have left that one? It's such
Totally.
It's so beautiful, but you don't really get to pick and choose when you start writing writing the lightning of the upheavals.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we have entered a very precarious time where like these kinds of ideological sort of nuances are like really important because people can like go down some really I mean, to me, wrong-headed sorts of avenues by being imprecise and by being hyperbolic and by you know yeah, exactly, like just embracing that sort of momentum that is not really smart.
Yeah, I would love to have you back on the show sometime to talk about your films. I guess I am going to briefly mention a scene in Night Moves where I just rewatched it in anticipation of talking to you. And I was like, make sure you remember that best anarchist film, but focus on denial. But there's a moment where the Jesse Eisenberg character has committed this bombing, and he works in this kind of co-op farm, and the man who runs the farm is like, get out of here. And Jesse Eisenberg says something along the lines of, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing, like, we've got to make a difference or something. And the guy's like gestures towards the farm. It's like, that I am making a difference, asshole. Like that's like getting off the grid and farming.
Yes.
Enough of us do that.
Yeah, no, that to me was the sort of like kernel of, I mean, that was the ideological argument that I felt like I was trying to stage there. Is like, you've got the sort of direct action model on this side, and then which is fundamentally negative. I mean, it is like negating and it's like destroying, and which I understand. I mean, that is like a feeling I totally feel. But then you have then a more creative path, which is like creating something and actually like investing in the future in the way. The really sad, horrible postscript to that is that that film was shot at some friend of ours organic farm in Southern Oregon. They built this incredible um, farm in the Siskiyou Mountains there, where they farm almost entirely with like trapped water. It's like almost sort of zero footprint, largely a organic seed farm. Built a beautiful like cob house. It's all there depicted in the film. They are now having to sell the farm because of climate change and because of desertification of that place. There's just not been enough water. And so that whole beautiful world that they created there, which is embedded in this place, the Applegate Valley, that is like one of the most politically complex and interesting neighborhoods I've ever encountered, because it's like anarchists on one side and Ron Paul, libertarians on the other, like living basically the same life, but like having like totally different kinds of like worldviews, but like all sort of like just right there. And like, it's so fascinating. But like sadly now it's just like, not possible.
Damn, I think you're talking me into blowing things up. Like, because I was like, that's what I took away from that film. Is like, don't blow up the stuff. Build the utopia you want to live in. But then, because some asshole somewhere else are, fracking, the utopia gets destroyed. Whoops, that's not usually the ethos I go for on this show. But I just advocate the bombing of industrial civilization. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, well, you can't help but want to, I mean, that was what I found like interesting with that film, is it's like, the reception was like a little mixed in some ways. And I realized at a certain point, I'm like, to sort of understand this film, you have to go in with the premise that you want to blow up the industrial infrastructure, and if you don't have that as a basic sort of concept, then a lot of it might not really make entire sense to you.
I started my very second episode, I think, of this entire podcast was about Tolkien, because he very much wanted to blow up industrial infrastructure. If you don't like when they destroy Isengard, like that's not like that's a fantasy for Tolkien, and it was a fantasy that he wanted to blow up the dams also. And if you don't want that, yeah,
then
it's
there's
like,
something dead in you. I mean, there's
yeah.
something, and I mean, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to, there's a chunk. I mean, I marked a ton of chunks. Again, I'm a literature professor. Going through books and underlining and scribbling things is what I do. But there was one chunk I wanted to read if I can find it. So it's when two characters, I think I'm not going to, for spoiler reasons, reveal who the two characters are exactly, but they're
Okay.
discussing these Nuremberg trials, which again I'm suggesting is a sort of like very top-down bureaucratic response to what clearly started as a bottom-up upheaval.
Yeah.
And then you get, let's see, so there's a character there. That was the book rustling of a physical book for those of you at home. Um, this person says, this person who is justifying the, I guess I'll read the person who is attacking. It says, hanging Jared Curtis, life imprisonment for Bowen. Those were some very severe sentences for guys who didn't actually kill anyone. They were just executives, bureaucrats. So was Goering, he said. This is the person speaking back. So was Himmler. The Toronto gang killed whole phylums. Someone had to be held accountable for all that carnage. That's how justice works. We choose someone and make an example so we know the limits. Those people stood for many. Someone had to be the representative. And a little further down, he goes on, the system as a whole is at fault. But as a species, we had to make a statement. We had to draw a line. This seems to be really important for this moment. It's also an important way of understanding, it seems like, the justice system as it exists. It's like
Mhm.
if when you drill down with people, the justice system doesn't really work. It's like, well, yeah, but we've got to show what we believe in, and we've got to show it with some form of bureaucratized violence. And when you try and imagine an alternative world, I will admit, most of us fail to. I was talking to a friend who said, yeah, like when you read about police corruption, your response is to say, yeah, those guys should be in jail, because you just
Yeah,
can't,
right.
like,
Exactly.
you
Totally.
just can't
Yeah,
imagine.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
this is a
Yeah.
world in which people have imagined a different way, and yet in some ways cannot imagine a
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, like this argument is not theoretical in Portland at this point right now, and it's like that has been a really like incredible and fascinating like community process to go through as like you start seeing, you know, big, huge, nice four square, craftsman bungalow houses in posh neighborhoods with big, huge "fuck the police," "defund the police" signs on them, and it's like, whoa, that you're the people the police are protecting. Like that's crazy, and you know, but at the same time, I mean, the police were not defunded here, but there was enough of a you know to do or whatever around it that the police have sort of stopped working. I mean, they all like got all their asses bent out of shape and are fundamentally like not policing at this point. And shootings have gone up 200% here. I mean, it's like it is, and our city is really dysfunctional. Um, I mean, I've stopped. I mean, this is a different but related issue. Like, I've stopped telling my kids that like shanty towns are not normal. That
Yeah.
like it's not. They don't really fully. I don't think they can believe me that like I grew up in a town where we did not have shanty towns or ranting like drug addicts all over the place. And like, um, you know, yeah, like it or not, like. A state is sort of necessary in order to maintain some level of social order, and it's
Or I mean,
an ugly, yeah,
yeah, to put it in a more optimistic way,
yeah,
you can't just pick what you think is the worst part of a state,
yeah,
remove
right,
it, and leave every place. Like, yeah,
yeah, yeah, right,
we could live a different way. I don't know how to get there.
yeah.
I can tell you
I
what
mean,
I wouldn't do is just
right.
remove the police from the streets and leave everything
And
else
leave
the
it
same.
exactly right. Or nor would I just like try to sweep a bunch of people out of their shanty towns without
Right.
giving them any kind of like wraparound services, as they call it, which is what's going on right now. And it's like that's also pointless. I mean, I was talking to someone last night who actually lives in Barcelona. Actually, speaking of Gaudi, and she's American, but like is not moving and has a kid who's 5 years old and would kind of like to move back to the United States, but like is like, but I have health insurance here. I don't need
Yeah.
to worry about my kid's college education. Like, why would I move back? You know, and like, you look at Western Europe in a lot of ways, and yeah, although the some people call that socialism. It's
Yeah.
like, no, that's just like fucking states with social safety nets and that have like invested in their own fucking future.
Yeah, I mean, this is a cliche, but I guess I can say it anyways. It is like this is the classic irony that it's like the people who most want the police on the streets are the same people who have constructed the system that has put people on the streets. And then they say, see, this is why we need police. And it's like, well, that's
Yeah, yeah,
no, you've
right.
got it exactly
Although, right,
backwards.
yeah, right. Although to be fair, there are plenty of people in East Portland right now who would like more police on their
Yeah,
streets because like their kids are getting shot. I mean, it's like it's not. There are some very basic, not basic. There's some grassroots people who are like, we need to do something about this, and it's gonna sadly take the force of the state to do it.
yeah. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
happens when you create a state and the state says no one else gets to do anything. And
yeah,
then the activists, for as we've discussed, very very good reasons, go against that arm of the state. It's, you're not
yeah.
anyone who thought some sort of anarcho-communist society was just going to spring up,
Yes.
even despite surrounded by everything else and in this corporate capitalist world, just because you remove the police. I'm much
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
interested in
Totally.
something like Cahoots. Is that Portland? I'm sorry, I get Portland and Seattle
Cahoots. I
confused.
don't know.
So
Tell me more. No, that's not Portland, but tell
okay,
me.
so
Yeah.
Cahoots is it's somewhere up there in that
Hmm.
socialist commune you guys call
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest, which
Yeah.
is it's mental health first responders who, if someone calls 911 and
Yeah.
someone is behaving erratically, they come with a blanket and
Yeah.
some water and the phone number of a homeless shelter instead of guns. That's not
Totally.
eliminating the state. It
Yeah.
might
Right.
move us towards
Right.
a less
Exactly.
militarized state, which might move us towards less of a state. But like, let's do that. And yes, that involves
Exactly.
working within the system, but you can, if you want to. This scholar Ruth Kenna calls this anarchizing. Let's
Yes.
anarchize the
Right.
systems we are in rather
Exactly.
than just think you can sweep them away. It doesn't work that
Exactly.
way.
Totally. Totally. No, I mean, in watching, like, again, going back to the you know tiny vanguard of Antifa that would like smash into the historical society and write like end history, on graffiti that all over the place. Um, like I get yeah, and yeah, imagining there's going to be some year zero where you suddenly have this like new society. Um, I mean, I'll just say partly it's as a writer that I think about this stuff and like I understand like revision is a process where things change radically with like many small changes all over the place, but you keep the basic text in place, and you sort of continually move it into a sort of better and more legible version. And like that just ends up making sense to me as a kind of
Mhm.
political process, like we're, which sounds like very Obama-ist sort of, gradualist sort of mentality. Um, but I feel like we have the entire 20th century to look at as far as like the other options, and they don't look that good. I mean, Stalin and Mao were not happy social experiments, and there's no reason to think that we're that much wiser.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's why I call this show Everyday Anarchism, because the
Exactly.
idea
Yeah.
is that you can do this.
Yeah.
You can do this in your day-to-day life, and eventually you will
Yeah.
get that utopia. But God, if you are waiting for the dear leader, whether that dear leader is
Totally.
democratically elected or not,
Yeah.
or if you think you can just smash the leader
Yeah.
and what you're going to get in return,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. Although again, if the
I know.
anarcho-communist
Yeah.
co-op farms themselves are
I
dying,
know.
then I don't
Yeah.
I don't
Totally.
know. I'm
No, I
back
mean
to
it's
that.
totally. I mean it's a tricky thing to comprehend. Like I mean, I find myself looking at the Republican Party, which I think at this point is an openly fascist party. There's
Yes.
no question about it, and realizing that okay, these are people who have lost faith in democracy because they can't convince enough people to do what they want to do, and they thus have pursued these more authoritarian sort of tactics. And I'm like, you bad people, like I don't want to, you're so terrible that way. But then there's a part of me that's like, but if there was like a left-wing dictator that I could install in a certain way, because I'm like, we need to make some like very like crucial social changes, and there is 47% of the country that is really in the way, and we need to somehow marginalize in a really profound way, in the way that you marginalize a 6-year-old from the dinner party. Like, you don't talk to these people because they're not really worth dealing with, and yet we can't just get rid of them. They're going to be there. Like, how do you square that with like a belief in democracy? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the kind of question that I struggle with every time I have someone on this podcast and this issue comes
Yeah,
up, and especially climate change makes the idea of anarchizing or democratizing everything. I mean, I think this is where Stan Robinson ended up, is like, shit, we got to do something
yeah,
now, and whatever levers of power there are, we have to pull them now,
yes,
now, now,
yeah,
now, because the upheavals don't. I mean, I got excited about Extinction Rebellion in London. Like, they shut the city down,
yeah.
and people's response was, why are these asshole eco-terrorists shutting the city down? So that's like, clearly shutting the world down with protest is not
It's
going to
not the
open people's eyes. It's
it's
not
not the way
working.
to it's not the way to win hearts and minds. No, it's not. I mean, that's why I'm so stoked about this, Biden bill. The Fighting Inflation Act, or whatever the fuck they're calling it. Um, but like, it is a radically imperfect kind of bill, uh, but it's at least moving in the right direction, and it is something that you can build on, assuming it's not totally dismantled by Republican Congress. But it is worth celebrating. I think that's like a real thing.
Yeah, and failing a mass upheaval, that's what we've got. And look, I mean, I haven't generated a mass upheaval, so it's time to let the legislature do it. If
Yeah,
we, I like
yeah.
to think that if we'd made better choices 50 years ago, we wouldn't be in this state. But those people got a mass upheaval. They got a mass upheaval against the Vietnam War and against certain forms of racial segregation, and then they
Yes.
got 30 years of backlash. So
Yeah, yeah,
like,
totally. Yeah, I mean, I'd say 50 at this point.
yeah,
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that's again, God,
yeah.
I'm really enjoying this conversation. I keep walking myself into positions I
No,
don't
it's
necessarily
really
intend
like when
to.
you get really practical, it's like the really boring truth is it's like, yeah, vote Democrat, like organize for the Democratic Party, and it's like incredibly unsexy, but it is sadly like, I mean, the joy. I mean, it's just so fucking crazy to me that like at this point I'm pro FBI, pro CIA, like, the idea of like sedition against the United States government is like abhorrent to me. I mean, that's not the person I was when I was a teenager. That's not the kid reading about COINTELPRO. That is like the world, but the world has gone through this funhouse mirror, and it's like at this point, yeah, I'm like a fucking Law and Order Democrat.
Yeah, I'm still holding the. I'm very much on a pox on both their houses, and like, if FBI and Trump want to like fall into the ocean like Godzilla style, and they both die like wrapped around one another, I'm I'm fine with that. I mean, if I have to pick one, sure, I can't believe I say this. I'll take the FBI
Yeah, right.
over actual fascists.
Yes,
But
exactly. Yeah.
I at least never made the mistake. One of my buddies had a picture of Mueller in his office, like, again, a good left wing guy, but it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, go FBI, and then when the FBI did what it always does, which is, not the right thing,
Yeah.
Mueller ended up in the trash can. I was like, yeah, I could have told you that was going to
Yeah.
happen. I
Yeah.
could have.
Right. Right.
The deep state wasn't going to save you, and they're definitely not the good guys. Although, sure, compared to
But yeah,
compared to the
it's
government.
all exactly. I mean, we're talking when you, yeah, the good guys are very hard to find. Yeah.
Jesus.
Are
Um,
all of your conversations this sort of morbid, or is this like,
no,
yeah,
no, it's usually. I mean, the problem is, John, my trump card is usually like just do some, just go to the co-op and
yeah,
buy some organic vegetables. So when you were like, yeah, climate change has destroyed the organic farms, I'm like, oh wait, that's
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
totally my cheat card is,
yeah,
community produced agriculture and goods and
yeah.
wares and
Right.
grains.
I
But
mean, granted, they had established their farm on some of the most already barely arable
mhm,
terrain imaginable. I mean, they were, you know, attempting to do something really difficult to begin with. I mean, and they should be able to do it, but it is. I don't think any of this negates like support your local organic farmer.
good, good. This is a place where we can be on a bit of an upswing. Support your local organic farmer. I think the only other thing about the book that we didn't really talk about, although you mentioned we talked about denial, is just the absolute hypocrisy, yeah, in every scene of these people who are living in this world where they just like they're absolutely disgusted at the idea of eating meat, but they're like, yeah, chicken, that's fine, no problem. Like this is, again, like all of these movements, it's not a coherent thing.
Totally.
It's messy and difficult. And if
Yeah.
you read one of these science fiction works where society has changed in the way that it's not messy and hypocritical and incoherent, that's when you're in the realm of someone who hasn't done good thinking.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's really uninteresting to me to read that kind of world building. Yeah, um, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, I really enjoyed the book, John. I really did. It's given me a lot to think about. This conversation was bad, and has upset me, but I think it was a very informative and useful conversation, even if I now feel sad.
Right. Sorry
Just
to be.
let me know about if they get back on their feet, farming wise. That's
Yeah,
like,
yeah. No, it's. I mean, that is a tragic thing. It's truly horrible. Um, yeah.
damn,
Sorry.
I took it back there again. But but do what you can. The people in your life, in your community, who are making beautiful things and growing wonderful food, support them. Start there. Vote for the Democrats. Don't fall in love with the FBI.
Yeah.
I think these are all good
Yeah,
lessons.
no, keep being extremely alert and describing things to yourself accurately. I think that's really important.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. This was super
Thank,
fun. Yeah.
thank you, John.
Yeah. Bye-bye.